Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD, pro physique athlete. Today I'm going to be sharing a 6-day hypertrophy program that's a modified version of Chris Bumstead's push-pull legs. Chris Bumstead put out a YouTube video where he laid out his entire push-pull legs program. In looking at his programming, I realized that there were actually a lot of features of his program that I liked. And I've gone ahead and created a 6-day hypertrophy program that is science-based and is inspired by his style. I've made a number of modifications to it that I think will make it even better for hypertrophy. This is going to be a 6-day hypertrophy program that's low volume and well designed for an intermediate and beyond. We'll start off with a program walkthrough where I share everything you'll need to know to run the program yourself, including exercises, sets, and reps. After that, we'll talk about the weekly setup, or how I prefer to lay out the days across the week. Then we'll talk about some Cbum programming highlights, some unique features of his programming style that I like. Finally, we'll talk about the pros and cons of the program as written. Alright, let's do our program walkthrough. So this is Dr. Swole's Chris Bumstead-Inspired push-pull legs program. It's a low volume program but designed for someone who's intermediate to advanced. We have leg day number 1, push day number 1, pull 1, leg day number 2, push 2, and pull 2. Here are the exercises and there are the sets and reps. Here we have the total number of sets in each workout so you have an idea of workout length, and down here is our muscle group weekly set volumes. You'll see that this program favors the back and side delts. Starting off with leg day, you'll see that I've swapped around the order of the days. We'll talk about that later. We kick it off with lunges for the glutes and hamstrings as well as quads, 3 sets of 12 to 15 reps. After that, we have Romanian deadlifts, 3 times 10 to 12. I actually like how Chris puts his lunges before RDLs here, as Romanian deadlifts, or deadlifts as he does sometimes, are very fatiguing. They could impact your lunge work coming afterwards, so as an advanced athlete, it may make sense to put your lunges first. Next, we have hip thrusts, 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps for the glutes and hamstrings. He puts glute kickbacks here as an option. I personally think hip thrusts are better for overloadability, unless you really know what you're doing. Next, we have hamstring curls for the hamstrings, 2 sets of 8 to 10 reps, and then we have a double drop set after this. I got Chris's original program here, so in his program, he had hamstring curls where you did 2 sets of 40-second sets after your main working sets. I think those can be great for metabolic training, but I like drop sets better since you're better able to track how many reps you're doing with what kind of weight. And the way I do them is that I program my drop sets as a percentage of your original working weight. So you'll drop the weight by 25 to 50%. Do a drop set and then repeat. The power of this is that when you get stronger, your drop set performance will also scale up. Next, we have incline curls for the biceps, 3 sets of 10 to 12. And then we have easy bar curls for the biceps, 2 sets of 8 to 10. And then we have 2 myo rep sets. So this is my notation here, which means you'll take about a 5 to 15 second break, do another mini set of 3 to 5 reps using the same weight, and then repeat. For Chris's easy bar curls, he had those 40-second sets again. I like myo reps and drop sets, so we have them here. Myo reps can be useful if it's not so easy to switch up the weight on the bar, like if you're using an easy bar. Now you'll notice that I've placed my bicep work onto leg day off of pull day. We'll talk about that later. Next, we have push day number 1. We started with bench press for the chest, 3 sets. And we started with 2 heavy sets of 5 to 8 reps and then 1 back off set of 10 to 12 reps. I really like how Chris has done this here. It's kind of a modified version of the top set back off method, but basically you can get in some heavy work on your 2 main sets and then drop some weight off, but still accumulate some more volume later on. Next, we have cable press downs for the triceps, 4 sets of 7 to 10 reps. I think the triceps tend to do well with heavy weights, so I do quite like this rep range here. Then we have cable flies for the chest, 3 sets of 10 to 12, and you can actually superset this cable press down with the cable fly. The key for supersets is that you don't want to have them necessarily training the same muscle, just because it will decrease your overall performance. You'll notice in this push day, I've removed his alternating overhead presses. I just think these aren't ideal for overload, something you would only use if you were really advanced. Next, we have dumbbell lateral raises for the side delts, 4 sets of 10 to 12. Chris says to keep rest times under a minute, but I personally think you'll do better giving yourself a little bit more rest so that you can maintain the performance across your sets. Next, we have weighted dips, and you'll see in Chris's program, he had 3 sets to failure of unweighted dips. I actually like this kind of setup better. So you'll start off with 1 heavy set of weighted dips where you're really going for overload in the 6 to 10 rep range. After that, you'll do 2 drop sets to failure. On the drop sets, you can decrease the amount of weight you added or even just go to unweighted dips. Unweighted calisthenics can be really good for drop sets. They're very solid movements from the biomechanics standpoint, and since you're just using body weight, it's very easy to go to failure on them. You can just drop down to the floor. But I don't really like calisthenics standalone without weight added because you're not able to really progressively overload. You can always add reps, but I personally like setting things up in a way where you can add weight. So you'll see that I've placed one heavy weighted dip set here, so you can really focus on overload while still getting that metabolic training with the drop sets afterward. Next, we have pull day number 1, and we start with lat pull downs, 3 sets of 8 to 12, followed by barbell rows. These are for the back, 3 sets, and we have 2 heavy sets of 6 to 8 reps, followed by 1 back off set. Note here that Chris places his lat pull downs before his heavy bent rows. I think this is actually smart for an advanced athlete, and we'll talk about this later, but basically when you have a really heavy movement like barbell rows or RDLs, these can fatigue you for the exercises coming afterwards, so sometimes it's good to place those high stimulus exercises first. Next, we have straight arm pull downs for the back, 3 sets of 12 to 20 with 1 drop set. I've substituted these for unweighted pull-ups that he had in the program. You'll see that we have pull-ups later in the program already, and I don't quite like having just straight calisthenics in a hypertrophy program. Next, we have cable upright rows. I count these for the side delts, but they also work the traps. 3 sets of 8 to 12. Then we have seated calf raises for the calves, and we're using a MyRep scheme here. Here's my notation. So you'll do 1 heavy work set of 10 to 15 reps, followed by 7 mini sets of 3 to 5 reps. For these, you'll keep the weight the same, but take about a 10-second rest in between. I like to just count down from 10. I've approximated this as about 5 sets of straight set volume. You'll notice that I've swapped our biceps and calf work between leg day and pull day. This is to allow us to train our biceps when they're fresh, and the calf work can just move around to keep your workouts an even length. Next, we have leg day number 2, and we start off with squats for the quads, 4 sets. We're using a top set back off method here, so 1 top set of 4 to 6 reps and 3 back off sets of 8 to 10. Chris actually has this other way around in his program where he does his heavy work last. I personally like having the top heavy set come first because you'll be able to get the most out of your strength work, and lifting heavy can actually potentiate your performance for later sets, which means you might be able to perform better on your 8 to 10 rep sets later on if your muscles are already primed to lift heavy. I can see why Chris did what he did, putting the heavy work last, probably so that you're more warmed up. This is a consideration for a very advanced athlete who's able to just lift so much weight that you might not really be trying to push heavy weights anyways on your squat. Next, we have leg press, 2 sets of 8 to 12. Chris did these 40-second sets here, but I prefer just doing straight sets because you're better able to track overload. Next, we have leg extensions for the quads, 2 sets of 10 to 12, and we follow this with a triple drop set. You'll see that we do use a lot of intensity work in this program, so this is not designed for beginners. Next, we have hammer curls for the biceps, 3 sets of 10 to 12, followed by cable curls also for the biceps, 2 sets of 10 to 12, followed by a triple drop set. Note that you can cycle your drop set training. That is, you won't just jump to triple drop sets in your first week of your meso cycle. In week 1, you might start with no drop sets, then you can add them in gradually. Next, we have push day number 2. We start off with close grip bench press for the triceps and chest, 3 sets of 8 to 10. Chris actually includes a lot of heavy compound work in his program, which I really respect. It takes a lot of guts to continue lifting heavy, especially when you're an advanced athlete, and it also starts to get tough at an advanced level because of your connective tissues. Chris is probably genetically very resistant to injury, and this is one of the reasons why certain people do so well. Next, we have standing overhead presses, 3 sets of 10 to 12. These predominantly train the anterior delts, which I don't really count volumes for, and I think you really only need to overhead press once per week. Next, we have machine flies for the chest, 1 top set of 8 to 10 reps, followed by 2 drop sets. Again, we've converted those 40-second sets into drop sets here. After that, we have overhead cable extensions for the triceps, 3 sets of 10 to 12. Then we have dumbbell lateral raises again for the side delts, 4 sets of 12 to 20. And you'll see that I modified the rep ranges here to switch up the rep ranges from when we did lateral raises earlier in the week. This is a form of DUP, or daily undulating periodization, and I'm hoping that you'll change a little bit of the fiber types that you're hitting. With the high rep work, it can also be helpful from a mindset perspective to keep things fresh, and might allow you to progress a little better. Then we have 1 heavy set of dumbbell bench press of 6 to 10 reps, and we follow this with a couple of MyRep sets of push-ups. In Chris's program, he had 3 sets of push-ups just to failure without weight added. I love push-ups as an exercise, but I do think that you're better off having some sort of overloadable exercise come first. So here you'll see that you'll get your overload out of your heavy dumbbell bench press set, and then you'll follow up with 2 MyRep sets of push-ups to failure. So basically do as many as you can with 10 seconds rest in between. This will still allow you to get that intensity and metabolic work while still having a movement that you can overload as the weeks go by. So you're basically using these unweighted calisthenics as drop sets, and this is my favorite way to use them. Lastly, we have pull day number 2. We start off with weighted pull-ups for the back, 3 sets of 6 to 10. I really like adding weight to calisthenics just because it allows you to really overload. Next, we have barbell back extensions for the lower back, but also the glutes and hamstrings, 2 sets of 8 to 10. In Chris's program, he had rack pulls. I don't think rack pulls are a great choice from a stimulus to fatigue standpoint. Basically, they produce a lot of fatigue since you're lifting such heavy weights without actually putting that much stimulus on your lower back. So I think something like a barbell back extension would be a better option, especially if you're advanced. As you become more advanced, fatigue will become a limiting factor and you're better off spending your recovery resources by doing more volume or having it channeled towards hypertrophy. Then we have cable rows for the back, 2 sets of 8 to 12 followed by 2 drop sets. You'll notice that I save my intensity work like drop sets for the last set of the last exercise for a certain muscle group of any given workout. So I have taken away some of the intensity work Chris puts on earlier exercises. I think this is the best way to put in intensity work in your program, just because if you did intensity work on the earlier exercises, it will impact your performance on later exercises. You really want to try to optimize the total amount of volume you perform across the entire workout. Next, we have cable upright rows for the side delts again, 3 sets of 12 to 20. After that, leg press calf raises for the calves, 2 sets of 8 to 15. And finally, standing calf raises, 4 sets of 10 to 12, followed by 2 drop sets. Now that you've seen this program, are there any free workout programs out there that you want me to review and make modified programs of? Let me know in the comments below. Okay, now that you've seen the program, let's talk about the program layout. So here's my preferred setup across the week. We have legs day 1, push 1, pull 1, then leg day number 2, push 2, pull 2, and rest. You'll see that I've switched up the days from the traditional push-pull leg setup. Instead here, we have legs push-pull. The main reason why I've done this is that we want to separate our pull days and our leg days as much as possible. This depends somewhat on your training style, assuming that you're using heavy movements for your back training, which includes movements that put on a lot of axial loading. You will want to spread out pull days and leg days as much as possible throughout the week for fatigue distribution. Axial fatigue, which is produced from heavy compressive forces on your spine, is disproportionately tiring for your body. And if you're moving a lot of weight on these movements, you will recover better if you can spread them out across the week as much as possible. These include variations of heavy barbell squats, deadlifts, and rows. You'll also notice that when the cycle repeats in the middle of the week, our pull day comes before leg day. This is better than the other way around because a tough leg day can impact your upper body training coming afterwards, but not so much vice versa. You'll notice that leg day number 1 gets a little bit of priority in this program since it's the first workout of the week after your rest day. You'll be most rested for this workout and thus perform the best, and I think it's a good thing to get the most out of these heavy leg movements. Let's talk about a few highlights of Chris Bumstead's programming style that I liked and I preserved in this program. When going into this, I assumed that I was going to make a lot of big changes to the program. But on closer examination of his program itself, I realized that there were a lot of elements that I liked. And you'll notice that I've tried to preserve those elements as much as possible. First of all, I like how Chris takes on this push-pull leg setup in order to get a twice per week frequency for each muscle group. A lot of IFBB pros out there train using a bro split, and thus usually only train each muscle group directly once per week. Now, there are some things about being a pro bodybuilder on performance enhancing substances which will impact your training style. Often when you're really big and strong, beyond what's possible naturally, you do so much damage to your body lifting heavy weights, especially if you train to failure all the time, that you need that once per week frequency just in order to recover. But if you're able to auto-regulate and be careful with your training, you can probably actually get more out of things if you split up your volume over 2 sessions or more depending on how much volume you do. Next, I like how Chris includes a lot of heavy compound movements in this program. This is something where I do understand that at a very high level, again, you want to be careful with these heavy barbell movements. This is because at a high level, you'll be pushing so much weight that it really will affect your connective tissues and you'll be more likely to run into chronic overuse injuries. But I like how Chris still continues to keep these heavy lifts in, and you'll see that one of the main mechanisms he uses in order to keep fatigue in check is to include metabolic training. In Chris's own program, he uses a lot of these 40-second sets where you really don't worry about your performance, like the amount of weight you lift, and just continue the set for 40 seconds. I do like this concept, although as you saw me describe, I prefer drop sets just because they're a little bit more trackable. But the idea is that you get a bit more stimulus using low weight and higher reps. You can capitalize on that metabolic stress pathway for hypertrophy without causing much damage to your connective tissues and joints. Okay, now let's talk about pros and cons of this modified Chris Bumstead push-pull legs program. First of all, with the pros, You'll notice in this program that we aim to put our high stimulus exercises first in the workout. This is something that becomes more important as you become more advanced. A good example of this is how he places lunges before RDLs and lat pull downs before barbell rows. The idea here is that you put a high stimulus exercise first, where you're really able to target those muscles, while putting more fatiguing exercises a bit later in the workout. Something like a heavy RDL or deadlift is very fatiguing, and if you're able to lift really heavy, it will impact the exercises coming afterwards. That is, you won't be able to perform as well, you won't lift as much weight for as many reps, or perform as much volume. Now, in most of my programs, you'll see me put the biggest, heaviest barbell movement first in the program. This is just so that you get the most out of that exercise. But at an advanced level, when you're lifting really heavy, you might want to put some of those exercises later. This really only matters once you're actually lifting really heavy weights. So I think for most people, it doesn't really apply. Okay, next pro of this modified push-pull legs program is that you get a high frequency for your biceps and side delt training. These are just some of my favorite modifications to make to almost any program, as you've noticed. The biceps, since they get trained indirectly on your back days and then directly on your leg days, you end up getting a 4 times per week frequency, and side delts also get trained with a high frequency. These muscle groups tend to do well with higher frequencies. Next, with this program, you get to train your biceps when they're fresh. This is a big con of the push-pull legs programming setup, where biceps come after your back movements on pull day. Since biceps get worked indirectly on pulling movements, if you place your bicep movements after back movements, they will be fatigued, and they won't be able to perform as well on your direct arm training. By moving biceps onto another day like leg day, you can train them when they're fresh, and you'll be able to get more out of those movements. I actually think that this kind of modification would be something that Chris would benefit from himself. I know that he was trying to bring up his biceps for a while, and as I've explained, with some careful modifications to your split, you can change where emphasis is placed on different muscle groups. Last pro of the push-pull leg setup is that there's no interference between days. Push-pull legs is very intuitive, and I can see why beginners like it. It's simple to set up, and your days don't interfere with each other. Okay, now let's talk about cons of this modified push-pull legs program. First disadvantage is that your triceps are trained after pushing movements. Heavy horizontal and vertical pushing movements do involve your triceps to a high degree. And if you have your direct tricep training coming after these movements, you won't perform as well. This is just like as we talked about for biceps earlier. This is just something that's inherent to the push-pull leg setup. I didn't end up modifying this split in this way just because I feel like the biceps are more of an issue, and triceps and pushing movements can be a little tricky to program if you try and split them up. But this is a disadvantage. Next, this is a very high fatigue program. Chris uses a lot of intensity techniques, including metabolic training and train to failure in his work. When you combine that with heavy compound movements, you end up generating a lot of fatigue. This won't be an issue for a beginner since you're just not able to push that much weight. But for someone who is advanced, fatigue will become a limiting factor just because your body has a finite amount of recovery resources. Now, Chris gets around this because he trains with low volumes. I also suspect that he has very good genetics for his connective tissues. When you start combining higher intensities and higher frequencies, a lot of people will get injured. Finally, with the push-pull leg setup, you tend to have uneven days where you have short pull days. You'll notice that this actually can be favorable in a setup like this where you're trying to bring up your back. You'll see that this program emphasizes the back and side delts. So to some extent, we actually can turn this disadvantage to our favor. The back and side delts are really important for building that V-tapered physique, so I have no issues putting extra volume here. Now, I will be sharing this full program as an Excel file in my Facebook group, so you can find the link in the description below, join the group, and you can download the program for free. If you want to take your knowledge to the next level, check out my affiliate link for MASS in the description below. MASS, or Monthly Applications in Strength Sport, is an elite research review run by some people I really trust. If you want to see another push-pull leg split, check out this program where I share a modified program with slightly higher volumes. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.